As in life, even when diving, we have to constantly make decisions. From the most important, to the smallest ones. From those that absorb our thoughts, to those we make without even thinking about it. And of course, even in diving, the decisions we make carry consequences, perhaps determining the development of an event in one direction, rather than another. Perhaps in an unfavorable direction, rather than one favorable. In his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, Nobel Prize winner, Dr. Daniel Kahneman, explains how we make this considerable amount of decisions, and also how systematically, we look for shortcuts to make more of them, for as little effort as possible. From the studies of Dr. Kahneman, and many other of his colleagues, it has emerged that we have two systems coexisting in our mind. The first system, which operates automatically and quickly, with little or no effort, and no sense of voluntary control, is always on, and cannot be turned off. While the second system is turned on, at the request of the first, for more complex reasoning and decisions. Using the second system is tiring, and requires the consumption of a considerable amount of calories. To limit the use of this wasteful system, the first system often relies on some kind of pattern. For example, in the past, when a specific situation showed up, we have reacted in a specific way, and everything went well. The next time, when a similar situation arises again, the first system may still react in the same way, and without consulting the second system. These kind of association, substitution, and so on, can happen in various ways, and can even be forced, and very often lead to bad choices. Choices that we would not make, if we accepted to pay the tax in terms of time and effort, required to activate the second system to ask its opinion. We could say that the way we make decisions is often anything but logical. Even when we have certain information at our disposal that could help us make a better decision, we often end up making decisions based on the time and effort they take, and often by not making the most appropriate ones. These are ingrained processes in all of us, and are not always avoidable. Having enough time, we should remind ourselves of this tendency to take wrong shortcuts, and we should ask the second system what it thinks, which should give us an answer, based on the best certain information it has. To make this work, over time, we should strive to acquire as much right information as possible, and we should learn to recognize it, even when it presents itself differently from what we would expect. However, Dr. Kahneman himself tells us that even the best trained professionals of various kinds often fall victim to it.
But could all this have been enough? Of course not. According to Dr. Adam Robinson, stupidity is not the opposite of intelligence. He defines stupidity as making wrong decisions, even if in possession of information that should make us make different ones. He lists 7 different situations that, when present, place us within the stupid zone, within which we are more likely to make stupid decisions, because we become literally blind to crucial information. Let's look at these 7 situations, and see how many of them can potentially be present while diving.
1. Being outside our normal environment. Have you ever had your real estate agent come to your property several times to discuss details, or just for courtesy, but then, when it was time to put down on paper the price at which you were willing to sell, the agent asked you to meet him in his office? If yes, it was maybe to take you out of your comfortable environment and put you in a new one that offered you fewer references. The goal was probably to get a lower price that would allow him to be more competitive in the marketplace. Literally speaking, when diving, we are always outside of our comfortable environment. With practice, we may start to feel this new environment becoming more and more familiar to us, but it takes time, and surely is not going to happen when we still are beginners. We could say that this situation is always present for virtually all divers.
2. Being physically or emotionally compromised. For example, when we are tired or stressed. We have already talked about the difference between considering diving a sport or considering it an adventure. Those who expect to see divers, who at the end of a dive stop with their hands on their knees, panting as after running 200 meters at top speed, are obviously making a mistake. But that diving is a tiring activity, is a fact. Just exposing ourselves to the physical pressure generated by water, and the level of stress that can be reduced but not eliminated, tires us out. For beginner divers, this situation is always present.
3. Have a sense of urgency. We began the course being told that, by varying our depth even slightly, we could experience ear pain, and that if we did not intervene in time, we could even face perforation of the eardrum. Worse, we were told that going up even a little without exhaling could lead to extremely serious consequences. Or that by descending a little, we had to be careful not to break corals that have taken years and years to become so beautiful. We were told to check our instruments, to make sure we did not go beyond the planned depth, the planned time, and the planned minimum acceptable amount of residual gas. We were told to often check and communicate with our buddy. When we learned how to empty the mask or recover the regulator, in our heads was to have little time, and maybe only one attempt. A sense of urgency is the norm for beginner divers, and will be so until they have reached a sufficient level of skill. This condition is also practically always present. And it can also be present for experienced divers, when they are engaged in a new type of diving, which requires them to focus on more and new details.
4. Being in the presence of an authority. Instructor, dive guide, or more experienced diver, represents an authority to whom we more or less consciously delegate various tasks, even those we should never delegate. This behavior makes us lower our guard level, and makes us more susceptible to making mistakes, as well as progressing less and more slowly. If you are unable to dive without a supervisor present, and thus unable to take care of every single aspect of your dive, then you are susceptible to this situation, and most divers certainly are. For a diver who is not yet 100% independent, this situation is also always present.
5. Being in the presence of a large group. In a group, personal responsibilities seem to be reduced, as if we think that if not us, someone else will do what needs to be done. Obviously, no one else can do what there is for us to do. But continuing to delegate to others what we should be able to do ourselves will also have consequences in the long run. For example, when we delegate dive management to others, the dive buddy may sometimes already be considered as a group. In this context, this condition is almost always present, and few beginner divers check all the necessary parameters for their initiative. Beginner divers often willingly leave certain tasks to some other member of the group, even the most basic ones, such as checking the amount of available gas, or the dive navigation.
The 6th. Anything that requires intense focus. We have limited focus abilities. We can concentrate on only a few things at once, and for a limited time. Diving requires us to keep several things in check, and for the whole duration of the dive. And at the same time, hopefully have fun as well. All this, to the cost of considerable energy consumption, and increased stress. Just as fixing intense focus on what we perceive to be most urgent, at the expense of other equally important tasks, can lead to poor decisions and mistakes. This is a situation that we learn to deal with as we grow up as divers, but that is potentially always present for those who are not yet experienced.
7. Information overload. Depth, dive time, no deco time, gas consumption, navigation, stream direction, buddy check, and so on. Being overwhelmed by the amount of information is a frequent situation for beginner divers. To survive this load of mental effort, they often have to make some choices, usually sacrificing good techniques. It is a situation very common for beginners, potentially able to compromise both fun and improvement.
According to Dr. Robinson, not all of these 7 situations have to be present at the same time for us to make bad decisions, and the simultaneous presence of a couple of them is more than enough to impair our decision-making abilities. To make matters worse, when we are inside the stupid zone, we are not aware that we are in it. Probably, Dr. Robinson is not a diver, otherwise, he would probably agree that when diving, even only one of these conditions could put us into the stupid zone. Adding together, our natural tendency to make our decisions, in a way that is not always logical, and the almost certain simultaneous presence of at least 2 of the 7 factors. It is not surprising that as beginner divers, or anyway not yet experienced, we may still have some problems to solve. Fortunately, we can eliminate, or at least reduce, all these 7 factors, as well as, we can learn to use efficiently the cheap and fast system 1, in most of the diving scenarios, we can reasonably expect to face during our recreational dives. I suggest you watch this series of videos until the end, and then visit the free link on the divingmethod.com website to see why some divers are more prone than others to them.
Thank you for watching this video, and take a look at its description for the link to the next episode of this series.